the program, as I did mention earlier, should have begun at 10 o'clock. And Sir was here on dot 9:50. And it talks about even after 6 years of retirement, if he can really make himself available, which is a task in itself. And if he can be here, why can't we? Friends, we begin our first session with Professor C. Naganna. Professor Naganna needs no introduction. It's like introducing sand to an Arab. But nevertheless, teacher, scholar, translator, columnist, critic, and master of ceremony. He has he has really performed these duties meticulously and really successfully. And it is, this wearing these many hats is a difficult proposition in itself. But Professor Naganna is not the ordinary. He has managed this task that was given to him very successfully. And in fact, Professor Naganna will be addressing you on two topics, which is closer home to his interest. That is on translation. The first lecture will be on principles and methodology of translation, followed by Shakespeare in Two Cultures, which is more or less socio-cultural aspect of it. So friends, I'll leave Professor Naganna with you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good morning to you all. Waiting for a full house. I think the coordinator is a bit unhappy, but even then, the good old English poet John Milton said long back, "Fit audience though few," in Paradise Lost. Those of you who have read Paradise Lost or made an attempt to read it, you realize right at the start of the epic, Milton prays the goddess of learning, "Give me fit audience though few." So we shall not bother about large audiences. We are a group of scholars. Therefore, this kind of intimate situation is very, very rewarding according to me. We don't have to worry too much about the big numbers as far as the audience is concerned. Now we take a break at 11:30, and after 15 minutes of tea break, we come back at 11:45 and go to 1 o'clock. So obviously the first lecture will be truncated. It's going to be short. Let me see how much I can cram into the short duration. The title of the first talk is The Principles and Methods of Translation. Principles and Methods of Translation. So, very, take a seat. Whatever the artist practices is never without mentors. If you can write, here is your notebook. If you can write, I will be very, very happy. Not that you should take down like students do in the classroom, but some words, some phrases, some memorable sentences, some quotations would always come to your rescue when you actually start teaching your students. Therefore, note making is also an art. It is expected of you to take notes as far as possible. I don't want to convert you into students or attending the classrooms, but even then, a teacher never stops learning. In that sense, we are all students all of us are students, and we can never forsake that title. Whatever the artist practices, he is never without mentors who are anxious to tell him what he ought to do. Okay? Artists' critics are also ready to tell him how he has done it. If you presume that translation is an art, do you think that translation is an art? Do you agree that translation is an art? Yes or no? Yes. Yeah. So we are agreed on that count. If we presume that translation is an art, then translators must expect themselves to be subjected to instruction, advice, correction, and comment. All these things will come into play, and therefore there are quite a few mentors as far as the art of translation is concerned. There will be our attempt will be subjected to instruction, advice, correction, and comment from all the three classes of persons who delight in offering suggestions. What are these three classes of persons who are ready to give advice to the artists, in this case the translators? The three categories of people who are eager to advise the translators are informed, uninformed, and even the misinformed. That is the funniest part of it. The informed people will be there to guide you, to advise you, to act as mentors. The uninformed people will always be ready to instruct you. The third category, a very risky category, a dangerous category at that, they are the misinformed lot. They are very enthusiastic. You have to do like this, you have to do like that. What is wrong with your translation, etc., etc. They will come up with their own suggestions and solutions. The informed, the uninformed, and the misinformed. The third category of people, even they will come out with their own suggestions. So they all need to have some illuminating principles to justify their position. But what we need to understand is that it is impossible to state the principles of translation in succinct form. I want to repeat that sentence. It is impossible to state the principles of translation. In fact, that's the title of my lecture. The principles and methods of translation. Therefore, you may be expecting me to come out with certain principles of translation so that you can employ them when you become translators yourselves. Now, what I am trying to stress, emphasize at this point is that it is impossible to state the principles of translation in succinct form. This difficulty has arisen from the writings of translators themselves, because we are going to consider what are the suggestions given by the translators themselves, because they are the practitioners. We have to trust them, believe them. When the practitioners themselves are confused, then we are absolutely helpless. The truth is that there are no universally accepted principles of translation. That is the whole problem. There are no universally accepted principles of translation. Because the only people who are qualified to formulate them have never agreed among themselves. On the other hand, they have so often contradicted each other that they have bequeathed to us. I'm sure you are all familiar with the word bequeathing. What is the meaning of the word bequeath? B-E-Q-U-E-A-T-H-E-D. Passing on to the next generation. Bequeathing, to pass on. So, the difficulty is that the practitioners themselves have contradicted themselves, and they have bequeathed to us, passed on to us, a volume of confused thoughts. They have not clarified, they have not given any clear definition of the principles of translation. Instead, they have given us a volume of confused thoughts, which must be hard to parallel in other fields of literature. So the field of translation is full of confusion in that sense, because of the practitioner's own definitions. To make plain the nature of the instruction which would-be translators have received. So some of you in the audience may want to be translators tomorrow, so you are categorized as would-be translators. How are you going to deal with this set of contrasting parallels that I am going to give you now? In fact, these contrasting parallels have been given by the translators themselves. For example, consider this pair. A translation must give the words of the original. A translation must give the words of the original. Some expert says this. Another man says, a translation must give the ideas of the original. A translation must give the ideas of the original. The first man said, a translation must give the words of the original. As a contrast to that, the second man said, a translation must give the ideas of the original. This is one pair. Consider the next pair. A translation should read like an original work. A translation should read like an original work. Another man says, a translation should read like a translation. This is the second pair. A translation should read like a translation. Consider the third pair. A translation should reflect the style of the original. I repeat, a translation should reflect the style of the original. That is completed by this sixth quotation. A translation should possess the style of the translator. That completes the third pair. I repeat the last statement. A translation should possess the style of the translator. The other man said earlier, a translation should reflect the style of the original. This man says a translation should possess the style of the translator. That completes the third pair. Let's go to the fourth pair. A translation should read as a contemporary of the original. A translation should read as a contemporary of the original. A translation should read as a contemporary of the translator. That completes the fourth pair. I repeat the last observation. A translation should read as a contemporary of the translator. The next pair. The translation may add to or omit from the original. I repeat, a translation may add to or omit from the original. Add or omit. That pair is completed by this statement. A translation may never add to or omit from the original. May never. Notice that finality. A translation may never add or omit from the original. You don't have any business to add or subtract from the original. That's the meaning of the statement. The last pair on our agenda, a translation of verse should be in prose. I repeat, a translation of verse should be in prose. The last observation, which completes the fifth pair, a translation of verse should be in verse. The earlier statement said a translation of verse should be in prose. Now this statement says a translation of verse should be in verse. Now, after having taken notice of these contrasting pairs, we had 6 pairs actually. Looking at these statements, surely a would-be translator would be completely flabbergasted, would be totally confused. How each observation contrasts and contradicts the next observation, and how to arrive at the acceptable principles of translation. So the pair of alternatives given here gives us the distinction between the literal or faithful translation and the idiomatic or free translation. Literal or faithful translation and the idiomatic or free translation. So there has always been support for. Yeah, please stop. Take your seats quickly. There has always been support for the translation which is as literal as it can be made. This support means that it is the duty of a translator to be faithful to his original. Even a lay person can endorse the advantage of a literal or faithful translation of the original. It need not look for an expert to say that faithful or literal translation is most acceptable. That is our immediate response. A translator, no less than any other writer, would not wish to incur the wrath, the charge of being unfaithful. If we are translators, we would not like to be labeled as unfaithful translators. Therefore, we all like to be called faithful translators, faithful to the original. But he should be clear in his mind what faithfulness implies and what faithfulness consists. A literal or word for word translation, literal word for word translation, is the most primitive type of translating things. The moment I say faithful or word for word translation is the most primitive translating type, I have already qualified, given you its merit or demerit or whatever. So this particular type of translation, means literal or word for word translation, is the most primitive type of translating things, fit only for the most mundane and prosaic of matters. I think this is a very important point, therefore I am dwelling on it at length. So the literal translation is fit only for the most mundane, mundane and prosaic of matters. So faithfulness is nearly impossible because any one word in any language, for that matter, cannot invariably be translated by the same word in any other language. Adrinda, a faithful translation is almost impossible because such an equivalent will not exist in any other language. Let us say you are translating from Kannada to English or whatever. So that word will not exist in the target language, exactly giving the same accurate meaning. Therefore, what happens to your principle of faithfulness? It is extremely difficult to achieve that 100% success in faithful translation. That is the reason why faithfulness is advocated, because the translator has never allowed himself to forget that he is a translator. So all along we are reminded of the fact that we are translators and we are not original writers. So the translator knows very well that he is not the original author, and the work in hand is never his own. He is an interpreter. At the most, you can describe a translator as an interpreter, one whose duty it is to act as a bridge or channel between the mind of the author and the minds of his readers. ಅಷ್ಟು ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು. ಒಂದು ಬ್ರಿಡ್ಜ್ ಆಗಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದೇ ಹೊರತು ಅದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಏನು ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ. He can be an interpreter, one whose duty it is to act as a bridge or channel between the mind of the author and the minds of the readers. So he must efface himself, and also Rome or Berlin to speak directly to London or Paris. That is his business. Let Rome or Berlin, or to speak directly to London or Paris. I am referring to these cities because the cities represent the languages of the respective countries. Therefore, he must efface himself. If he feels he has done this, he may well be proud of his achievement. That is, to illustrate, to give an example, I take up the reference to William Cooper. I don't know how many of you have heard of him. William Cooper set up his translation of Homer. William Cooper has also translated Homer, like many English translators who have been struggling with Homer down the centuries. William Cooper, belonging to 18th century, set up his own translation of Homer. I quote, "My chief boast is that I have adhered closely to the original." This is what he says. Adhere closely to the original, and this is what we expect of a faithful translator. We do not expect a faithful translator to deviate from the original. Therefore, William Cooper has said of his translation of Homer, "My chief boast is that I have adhered closely to the original." But the translator who attempts to follow this principle soon runs into difficulties, which have been described well by Rossetti, another distinguished poet of the 19th century. His full name is Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Okay? Dante Gabriel Rossetti is remembered along with his sisters named Christina Rossetti. Both of them, brother and sister, contributed wonderful poetry to the English language in the 19th century, as you all know. This Dante Gabriel Rossetti was an English poet, illustrator, painter, translator, and member of the Rossetti family. Therefore, he helped found the what we call Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, a group of painters treating religion, moral, and medieval subjects in a non-academic manner. His sister, Christina Rossetti, her full name is Christina Georgina Rossetti, was an English writer of romantic, devotional, and children's poems, including Goblin Market. There is a very well-known poem. So Rossetti has said, just like William Cooper, I quote, "The work of the translator, with all humility be spoken, is one of some self-denial. One of some self-denial. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂತ್ಕೋಬಹುದು, ಅಷ್ಟು ದೂರ ಹೋಗಬೇಕಾಗಿದೆ. We can sit here. occupy the front chairs. Equally. So, I quote Gabriel Rossetti. The work of the translator, with all humility be spoken, is one of some self-denial. So, you are not expecting a translator to project himself or herself all the time. It is a question of self-denial. That's the reason why I use the word self-effacing. So, your presence is not obvious in your translation. As far as possible, you try to be in the background. Therefore, Rossetti says the translator's job it is to be, self-denying. So we can paraphrase what Rossetti has said in the context. I quote again: a translator may be tempted to use the idiom, the cadence of his own epoch. Very, very important statement this is, according to me. Rossetti's statement. He says, a translator may be tempted to use the idiom, the cadence of his own epoch, but he would not do so for the sake of the author. So he would like to use the idiom and the cadence. Cadence andre no? C-A-D-E-N-C. Cadence andre adhvani. ಅವನ ಕಾಲದ ಸಮಕಾಲೀನವಾದಂಥ ನುಡಿಗಟ್ಟುಗಳು ಮತ್ತು ಧ್ವನಿ ಅದನ್ನು ಉಪಯೋಗಿಸಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಟೆಂಪ್ಟ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಲೇಟರ್ಗೆ. ಆದರೆ he would not do so for the sake of the author, number one. Number two, likewise, he may be tempted to slight the matter of the music and music for the matter. He may be tempted to slight the matter for the music and music for the matter, but he would not do any such thing for the sake of the author. Again, music for the matter, content and sound of the words. The translators may be tempted to change the music for the sake of the matter and change the matter for the sake of the music, but he cannot do so, he will not do so. Sometimes some error in the work galls him. The work means the original work. Some error in the original work disturbs him, galls him. He would be tempted to remove it, but he would not do so because it is not in the bond. It is not in the bond. What bond Dante Rossetti is speaking of here? He would, because it is not there in the bond, he would like to change the error, correct the error. He would like to change the matter for music and music for matter. He would like to attempt the change of some cadence, some idiom, some substituting some idiom of his own or his own epoch to become contemporaneous, but he would not do so because it is not in the bond. Bond means an implicit agreement of faithfulness. That is the bond we are talking about. An implicit agreement of faithfulness. Therefore, the translators would not make any changes whatsoever in idiom, in cadence, in matter, in music, and even in error. He allows the error to stay as it is. He would not come out with corrections. So this passage of Rossetti clearly tells us that literal translation is a difficult task. We may take easier paths of freedom. Everyone likes freedom, and therefore the translators also like freedom. They would not be fettered by the framework of the original. Every now and then, the translators would like to be free. I am right now invoking an expert's name, J.P. Postgate. As a translation expert, J.P. Postgate. Another distinguished expert says, I quote, principle of faithfulness is set up as a merit of true translation. Principle of faithfulness is set up as a merit of true translation, unquote. So, freedom in translation means the translator has shirked the labor of making a close approach. If you want freedom in translating, obviously you just would like to avoid close approach to the original words and phrases. And that's the discipline of self-denial described by Rossetti. Rossetti, said self-denial is important. But a translator who wants some freedom will not be able to toe the line. A general implication is that a translation must be such as may be read with ease and pleasure. ಈ ಎರಡು ಪದ ನೀವು ಬರ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೇಬೇಕು. ನಾವು ಏನೇ ಓದಿದ್ರು translation, there should be ease and pleasure as far as the reader is concerned. Without ease and pleasure, the translation will not be successful. If you really want this translation to be successful, the reader should be able to read with ease and pleasure. These are the two expectations which should be fulfilled by any translation for that matter. Because if it is not easy and pleasant, it will never be read and might as well never have been attempted at all. So what is the use of a translation if it's not easy and pleasant? How much latitude a translator can give himself is the question now. How much liberty he can take as far as the original is concerned. This is what I mean by how much latitude a translator can give himself is the question. If the original reads like the original, then the translation should do so too. That is like an original. If an original reads like an original, the translation must also be read like an original. Another important point is that it's agreed that there is a distinction between the original author and his translator, and the translator must constantly remember his debt to the author. D-E-B-T, debt. A translator must constantly remember his debt to the author. Because of the author, translator exists. Not the other way around. Not the other way around. I will come to that later, how translator is also important. Because through him, an original writer derives what we call the afterlife. Have you heard of this term called afterlife? Afterlife is that which gives a long lease of life to the original author. Through translation, an author lives on. So, an author lives on as far as his original works are concerned, and also the translations providing a long lease of life. Anyway, at this stage, what I want to emphasize is that an author a translator owes a debt of gratitude to the original author. But we can never forget the fact that a translation is equally the result of original thought. ನೀವು ಹೇಳ್ಬೋದು ಆ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಇತ್ತು ಅದನ್ನು ನೋಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಇವರು ಅನುವಾದ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತ ನೀವು ಹೇಳ್ಬೋದು. ಆದರೂ ಒಬ್ಬ ಅನುವಾದಕನ ಆಲೋಚನೆ, ಚಿಂತನೆ, ನನ್ನ ದ್ರವ್ಯ ಏನಿದೆ ಅದು ಕೂಡ ಒಂದು ಒರಿಜಿನಲ್ ಥಾಟೇ. ಅದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಡಿನೈ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ. ವಿ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ನೆವರ್ ಡಿನೈ ದಿ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ ದಟ್ ಈವನ್ ದಿ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಲೇಟರ್ಸ್ ಥಾಟ್ ಈಸ್ an original thought as much as the original thought of the original author. And considerable work is demanded on the part of the translator also. So that is the reason why I can say with certitude that the author has an equivalent debt to the translator. Just as the translator owes a debt to the author also owes a debt to the translator, equivalent debt, which I call. So, who is in an undeniable degree the proprietor of the translation as such? The translator is the proprietor of his translation. Nobody can snatch it away from him. The translator is the proprietor of his work. So this proprietorship permits the introduction of departures from the precise phrasing of the original. Because of this inbuilt proprietorship or inherent proprietorship on the part of the translator, sometimes he can depart or the departure is allowed from the precise phrasing of the original. But the extent of departure is carefully kept within the allowable limit ಅಂತ ಒಂದಿರುತ್ತೆ. Thus far and no further ಅಂತೀವಲ್ಲ, ಹಾಗೆ ಒಂದು allowable limit ಅಂತ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. How far a translator can go. So this, don't blame me, blame yourselves. Because although the class was to begin at 10 o'clock, most of you came just now, some 10 minutes ago. So, never mind, we take a break. Now, you deserve a cup of morning coffee, then we reassemble and see what best we can do. Actually, after tea break, I should move on to the second lecture, but I am still halfway through or quarterway through my first lecture. So this is the first day, and this is the RUSA program. Everybody tends to take it easy as if it is a bonus. Badraito, certificate ashte anta. Athara ಒಂದು ಮನೋಭಾವ ಇದೆ. But blame yourselves, not me. Had you come at 10 o'clock, you could have finished the first lecture. Anyway, we'll reassemble after the break.